Welcome to the Liberty Collaborative, where the past meets the present in the fight for freedom. We uncover the roots of liberty, spotlight the people who shaped it, and explore what it takes to preserve it today. If you're ready to think deeper, stand stronger, and act with purpose, you're in the right place. Let's reclaim what matters most.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Liberty Collaborative. I'm your host, Aaron Bowman. Joined with me, Chris Coyle, the creator of Wins Lab, and that is just a fantastic program if you're looking for a way to start winning, whether it's in business or in your political career, and the founder of the Frederick Douglass Republican Engagement Method, which is K. Carl Smith. Welcome, fellas, and happy 4th of July weekend.
Absolutely.
Yes, sir. Thank you. And
welcome, everybody.
So today we're going to be picking up where we left off last week about the Branch Brawl. And Chris, if you would, just let's give the people a little introduction of ourselves, so those that might be listening new.
Absolutely. Folks, Liberty Collaborative's mission for you, the audience, is simple. We think that anyone sees anything in the mainstream media, it's missing content and context. It's just missing it completely. Okay, Carl, it's also missing historical perspective.
That's very important because there's nothing new under the sun. So I think it's valuable to always go back in the history, especially during the time of Frederick Douglass, who was a slave, and he talks about his love for liberty and the oppression that he was dealing with, because the techniques of oppression used by the slave master are identical to the oppression used by the slave government. So when you understand the historical perspective, you're now more informed to have conversations, not confrontations.
Fantastic. And everybody, like I said, my name is Aaron, and I am not only the host, but I am a graduate, I guess we could say, of the Frederick Douglass engagement method, learning from Chris and K. Carl. So thank you all for listening, especially on this 4th of July weekend. And Chris, if you would, let's get a recap in of what we went over last time. Oh, and before that, I should say we are missing Michael Hancock. He had some personal things going on today, so he wasn't able to make it. But make sure you check out Michael. He is dropping the truth over on his Substack account, so that will be in the show notes if you want to check it out.
And we're publishing, I think, Aaron and K. Carl, on our Substack as well, Liberty Collaborative on Substack.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah. No, absolutely. You guys, we look for topics that are in the news, certainly, but really provide an avenue of exploration that helps our listeners have conversations, not confrontations. And we have been seeing for now, months, things like the No Kings parades, claims that there's a constitutional crisis, really inflammatory language. So what we thought was we would have a 5-part series called The Brawl of the Branches. Is there really a constitutional crisis? Or is this the natural dynamic working between the branches that the founders thought? I think so far in our discussions, we think a lot of the evidence points to the natural tensions between the branches as designed. And this inflammatory language of constitutional crisis, we think, is designed on purpose. And Michael writes a lot about that. But last week, we talked about the phraseology overall of the word crisis, of some of the words, Trump, every word with Trump is he's attacking someone or something, or he's unlawful. Well, today, perfect timing with the Supreme Court decisions last Friday, we're going to dig into the judiciary branch, what their mission is supposed to be under the Constitution, what the people are looking for, and what we're ending up with. And in that, we're going to talk about the recent decision limiting single district courts from a nationwide injunction.
Correct.
We're going to provide some clarity that no, they didn't stop nationwide injunctions. There's still other legal avenues, but what they foreclosed was the ability of a few district court judges from one plaintiff, one case, to create a national stoppage of the administrative branch. So we'll dig into that, and even a little bit detail about birthright citizenship, because there's a lot of underlying narrative going on that, again, is not accurate, that's leading up to some of this stuff. So that's the show for today.
Yeah, and that's a great overview, Chris. One thing I think we need to talk about before we get into this is, Chris, your background in all this. So, there's a lot of different news organizations, podcasters, and they're all kind of, giving their opinion on things, but none of them really have a legal background. Like for myself, I have a BA in law and policy and procedures, but for yourself, Chris, this is kind of in your wheelhouse. And if you just want to kind of give everybody I think it's important to have the context of your background when it comes to the judicial branch.
Yeah, no, curiosity is probably the headline when you think of at least myself. And because we are a country of laws and legal structure, I have been fascinated about the importance of principles, and particularly in this case, legal principles, and not personality politics. And as a lawyer, I went to law school at night a long time ago. I worked in New York City, actually teaching lawyers and judges how to use a research service called LexisNexis. I trained the Connecticut Supreme Court how to do research on that. And over the years have really studied the various dynamics of courts and so forth. So it's really with a curiosity, Aaron and Kay Carl. And I want to say this, Aaron, you touched on the fact that we're all looking for information. And there is a layer of information that is primarily selling ads, selling clicks. And it's primarily what I'd submit, guys, regurgitation and recycling. And often with an orientation. They're bad, I'm good. What we're always looking for is a little more of analysis. Save the conclusion a bit, temper it, but give us some analysis. So you're going to hear from us today, for example. We share some sources we think are quite good. Now, people may say, oh, he's a conservative or he's a rightist. Well, in a lot of these cases, these guys started out as Democrats, and their analysis has led them to particular positions. So anyway, a little bit of background. Aaron and Kay Carl, really maybe the place to start is, what are the courts, the judiciary supposed to do? We talk about, Aaron, you and I, what's the job description? What duty do they owe the people who put them in this position? Maybe we ought to start there.
That's good. That's a good place to start. And based on my civics training in government back in my elementary days, they're the judge. Period. Not they want to interpret the law, but not create any laws. And so that's the basic what I understand, and that's what I want to see happen, because that's not what's happening. That's the problem.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, Kay Carl. They're to interpret and apply the laws. These judges are not to, like you said, create policy or insert their own personal ideology. They're supposed to look at it from a legal standpoint, regardless if they like the outcome or not. That's how I would see it. And I think that's, like you said, definitely is not happening. And we can see things starting to get overturned at the Supreme Court level.
Well, to your guys' point, so people understand, there is a trial level of courts. They're called different things, but they are trying fact and law, and the fact and law interplay. But as you get to the levels of appellate, they're more and more whether the application of that law was correct, less and less on finders of facts. And certainly when you get to the Supreme Court, that is really, Kay Carl, to your point, interpretation of the Constitution. And second, the decisions of that same court, the laws as written, even if they're written a long time ago. So as an example, when I see a dissenting justice describe as minutia the legal precedent that the Supreme Court majority is citing, one has to question, wait, before we get to the substance of what this person said, what did they just say? That we're going to disregard one of our job description, which is to look at not only the law, Constitution, but precedent. And we're going to, if it's not convenient for us, we're going to disregard that precedent on the one hand. But when it is convenient for us, for example, Sotomayor's claim that the current definition of birthright citizenship is the law. Well, as we'll talk about, there are people who say, no, there's a phrase in there that we think is not properly applied, which is subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. But their job is to interpret that law based on Constitution, findings and holdings in whatever direction their statutory creation is as a district court.
Yeah, and Chris, like we've talked about before, we always tell people if we're going to be using AI for research and stuff like that. So I was going back and forth with my chat prompts with this topic, and it gave me a piece from Alexander Hamilton, and he put it that the judiciary has neither, quote, neither the force nor the will, but merely judgment, unquote. So it's kind of like they're referees, not players, I guess would probably be the best way to look at it. But yeah, that's really well put, Chris.
If you guys, and Aaron, you've turned me onto this. And again, I want to be clear to everybody on our sources. I use Perplexity AI, which I'm pretty impressed with, but I've uncovered significant bias.
Yes.
One only has to click on all their footnotes to see they're really only using sources from one side of the argument. But I found this one very fascinating. And it applies here. What is the difference between wisdom and understanding? And really, when you read it, there's the idea of understanding is taking present facts, perceiving and analyzing information, depth of knowledge. But wisdom is about synthesizing that and taking a longer-term view, discernment based on values, based on principles. And really, I think what we have more and more in the judiciary is a focus on trying to find the facts to justify the conclusion you've already reached versus really stepping back and saying, what are the long-term implications of this?
Yeah. Interesting. So actually this question, Chris, in terms of the Supreme Court's decision on this matter, how do you feel about that? This whole thing about judicial power.
So clearly, Kate, Carl, and Aaron, the procedural aspects of law and the substantive, that is the argument and the justification or rationale for a particular conclusion, are important. But what the court has been focusing on, particularly, guys, 10 years ago, did you ever hear the term lawfare? Didn't exist, right?
Nope.
No.
What was that? And we knew there were certain judges in certain districts that may be a little, quote, activist judges. Well, what that means is instead of applying the law and the precedent, it is trying to create new precedent and really sound more like policy orientation than principles based on holdings and the law. So in the recent cases, I really think coming from the frustration building up watching a New York City judge haul President Trump into court for crimes or violations that they claim, while of federal offenses, they found a way to suggest they were state jurisdiction, that they could in effect conflate or somehow decompose a federal matter into a state matter. It's still pending appeal in New York, but seeing that kind of treatment and then going to the particular increase, and I think, Aaron, or Kate Carl, you had some numbers on the number of nationwide injunctions just since Trump has been in office versus other presidents.
Yeah, looking through our show notes here, there's if I add them up from his first term to his second term, we're looking at 79 nationwide injunctions. And what's interesting is that 90% of those injunctions came from Democratic appointed judges. So to me, I think
what, 3 states, 4 states?
I believe so. Yeah. Let me look at the notes here. Yeah. I believe it's 3 states.
And it would be fair to say those are, quote, blue states.
Right. Blue states, just like Connecticut and, California and some of the other states out there. But it's interesting to see that. And it makes you have to wonder, are they doing these injunctions now for political reasons because the populace and he won the electoral college vote, he won the populist vote, and obviously these millions of people have said these are the things we want him to do and run on, and now you have these unelected officials, these judges that have been appointed by Democrats to come in and say, okay, nope, we're going to put the kibosh on this, we're going to stop this. So I think to me it feels more like they're acting as a political check on the president rather than doing their job as so-called the referee, type thing.
I agree with you on that because since they couldn't win with the ballot box, now they try to win by being legislating from the bench.
Right.
They couldn't win. Just like Proposition 48 out in California. Remember that when the citizens out there voted against Proposition 48 and then turned around, the courts got involved and said, wait a minute, the citizens don't know what they're talking about. They end up got it through and passed it through judicial means versus ignoring the rights and the votes of the citizens.
And what's fascinating here, you guys, is you've got these nationwide injunctions having to do with birthright citizenship. And what the court pointed out in its majority decision is that there are other avenues for what are known as class or group actions. So at issue was one plaintiff, one case, one court kind of makes a conclusion, then binds the administration in all states for all people with similar conditions. Supreme Court basically said in layperson's language is, look, there are ways to come to the court as a representative group and say we should freeze action on this until these issues. And certainly it's expected. I think some were filed that very day exactly like that. Now, the dissent argued, again, in inflammatory, amazing language. It's, of course, national news now, Justice Jackson, about the demise of civilization and the falling apart of the rule of law. What's fascinating is Justice Kagan, who did not write a dissent, interestingly enough, several years earlier had been on a talking panel and talked specifically about how it really was not intended for a single district court to bind the administration. Of course, in that case, she was speaking about Republican-oriented lawsuits, likely guys in Republican states that limited Biden. So she was against nationwide injunctions then, and now for them when they're used against Trump. So, Kate, Carl, and Aaron, to your point, that it's hard to gloss over that. Yeah. Clear bias. Just very hard to gloss over that.
I think for any conservative president in office, that's what they're going to get from the left. The left's not going to agree with anything they're going to do. So what they're going to do, and many times not based on principle, they're going to attack based on propaganda and try to spin that in a way where, and you talked about this before, Chris, the arguments they make is not based on principle. And that's the biggest problem, because if you it's really based on emotion many of the time, not even principle. So if you go with that, if you're not a well-read individual, what's going on, you're gonna fall for that, and that's what's happening a lot.
Yeah, and Kate, Carl, it's funny you bring that up, because I was talking with somebody here in town this morning, and that even happens at the local level. So not to get off topic, but we've had an issue here with our community center. They're getting rid of the Silver Sneakers program, and the Democrats are making it sound like, oh, we can't afford this, we can't do this. And so an unaffiliated, who is a council member, came out and said, well, this is pretty sad that we're getting rid of this, and all of a sudden, like we have a surplus. Anyways, point of the story is that as they're going back and forth on social media, it goes from the policy to why they're doing it, because they don't really have a good reason why, other than they're losing money supposedly, but all the other towns around us can support this, to personal attacks. Oh, all you do is agitate. All you do is make confrontation. You just bring things up. You're always causing conflict. And it's like, no, we're asking questions. And it's funny that not only does it happen at the national level, where if the policy's not working, they go to those personality attacks. It even happens at like your local town government. Yeah. It's kind of funny. But before we continue, guys, we got to take a quick break. So we will be right back.
Tired of politics that divide? The Frederick Douglass Republican strategy unites us, connecting across race and party through life, liberty, and truth. Speak with moral authority, not pandering. Lead with liberty, and people follow. Discover the movement in K. Carl's bold new book, Telling Conservatives the Truth, at kcarlink.com.
All right, welcome back to the Liberty Collaborative. We've been talking about the Branch Brawl and the judicial system and the overreach. And one thing I just wanted to make note of here, looking through our show notes and stuff, is that it's funny that nationwide injunctions have become more common in recent years, and they were very few issued before 1963, and that notably during Trump's presidency is when we've seen a huge uptick in them. So it's just kind of interesting to take that time frame, how from, before 1963, these really didn't exist. And now all of a sudden, like you were saying, K. Carl, if they can't win at the ballot box, well, I guess we're going to try to use the judicial system to overrule that.
Yeah, that's obvious.
The other thing I would point out, guys, again, for our listeners and viewers, giving both sides of the argument, look, in a rush to correct what many, many people, and obviously the majority of the country, believe was really an abuse of our integrity and sovereignty as a country with the promotion of illegal immigration. I'd note, number one, they keep leaving out the word illegal. They try and conflate it to, quote, immigration. But number two, when anyone with a badge, right or left, takes someone off the street and there is no judicial review, many people, conservatives and liberals, said, wait a second, we are a country of laws. There's got to be some basic due process. And in fact, the court appropriately, I believe, said time out. There's something called a habeas corpus hearing, and it should be in Texas or Louisiana, wherever this person was being held, and they did it. And notice, guys, you never hear what the outcome of that was. Well, the outcome was the government had the proper paperwork. They had multiple findings of gang members, and the person was gone. But it took plaintiffs saying, stop, we can't ever have a government, whether it's right or left, that has the ability to grab someone without some element of due process. But let's differentiate that with what we're talking about here, because there's sort of an underlying issue that was not addressed by the Supreme Court, but is giving rise to these inflammatory statements. So, for example, Sotomayor and Jackson, others claim Trump is violating the law. And what they're referring to is the holdings, the current sort of judicial bent toward what's known as birthright citizenship.
Yeah.
And if you look into this, I believe that Trump's argument is supported by a pretty good argument that, much like other things that were, quote, the law of the land, they were skewed over time and improper. But given the pressure of millions and millions of illegal immigrants, they become severely damaging to our country. I'll give you a little interpretation real quick. The clause talks about people born in the United States. And, Kay Carl, I want to come to you in a sec, because this comes out of the slavery period. Mm-hmm. Frederick Douglass, there was a very targeted reason for this. But what it says is, in a later amendment or edit, subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. So what you read is people want to forget about that clause and just say, well, they were born here. And so if one looks into this, I found this very helpful. Think about this. There's temporary and local. So I come across the border in Texas, and I'm now, quote, subject to the jurisdiction of Texas laws. It's local, it's territory, and it's temporary. And I have a kid. I'm illegally here, but I have a kid according to their definition and case law precedent for quite a while. That sort of is good enough. What others argue, I think substantively, and we'll see what happens, is that, wait a sec, was really meant? Didn't they mean that it wasn't temporary, it was permanent, that you were fully and naturally here to be a U.S. citizen, and most importantly, you weren't subject to loyalty or laws or another country? And so a lot of these people claiming birthright citizenship are still carrying the citizenship card from another country. So to describe Trump's disagreement with that precedent in these unprecedented times, I'll leave it with this, Kit Carl, over to you.
Yeah.
This is not abuse of law or breaking the law. It is going through the legal process of pushing the courts to say, our view is this of birthright citizenship. It's not Dred Scott at all. And to try and make analogies to the Second Amendment or the First Amendment or Dred Scott, again, is incredible red herring. It's distraction. It's intended to get the argument going really in a direction that's totally false premise.
Yeah, the problem I have with Sotomayor's view and her supporters, they're the same people who support open borders. So we live in a post 9/11 world where we got some enemies out there. So you support open borders, and they come across the border, they have a child, but on our soil. But here's the problem: they always talk about rights, but they never talk about duty and responsibility as a citizen. Just because somebody's born in the United States don't mean they support our obey our laws, support our culture. That doesn't mean that. And going back to the 14th Amendment was written and passed because to protect the citizenship of blacks, former slave, and their children. I don't remember saying that everyone born here should be a citizen. It was just primarily for those who were descendants of black slaves and the slaves themselves, not for everyone. And that's the problem. So it's just red herring. They think that by having these open borders, get people to come here, that most people are going to vote Democrat so they can stay in power forever. But we have the right message to turn that around, don't we? By leveraging Frederick Douglass.
Absolutely. And okay, Carl, what's neat about what you teach is, and indeed, Frederick Douglass wrote extensively about, is the fundamental meaning of the words of the Constitution or a declaration, for example. Every man is created inalienable rights. And there tends to be a sense, a duty, I think, in the part of people like us to hew to those words that were unique then and they're unique today in the whole world. There's no other government that starts with the individual liberty. And we think those definitions are important. Well, clearly, if the outcome of the way Sotomayor and Kagan and Jackson and other liberals believe is that, no, the words born in the United States are good enough, and that, okay, if they're carrying a passport from El Salvador, but they happen to land in Texas, good enough, safe. And we're all going, but what were those? Why did they put in those words subject to the jurisdiction? Wasn't there meaning there that you really want to be here? You've cut your ties with where you were. You're complete, right? Not temporary jurisdiction. To us, that seems reasonable and logical. They don't even want to talk about that.
Yeah. Let me ask this question. I don't know the answer to it. Maybe you all know. How many countries besides the United States have it as a practice where if you're born on that soil, you become a citizen of that country? I know in Japan that is not the case. Because I was stationed in Japan, and while over there, my daughter was born in Japan, but that did not make her a citizen of that country.
That's a good question. We know that no country in the world that we know of has open borders. That's for one thing, and we do know, right, Aaron, that in all the rest there is some level of scrutiny, of review, of who is coming in the country. As an example, you might recall about, 3 or 4 months ago, I forget which branch of the government did it, but they basically stopped anyone coming in from a long list of countries. Remember that? Mm-hmm. Said, we're stopping, you can't come in. And again, the left and the mainstream media went nuts and said, oh my God, this is terrible, racist, what have you. You know what they were asking? Guys, you're not collecting any security information on who they are, and we have basic requirements for you to get a visa that we need to know answers to. You don't check them at the airport. We have no background. So until you comply with our regulations because they want to come to our country, we don't want to go to yours, we're not going to let your people in. But again, they want to gloss over that, or worse, disregard, ignore, exclude those truth facts to the report. So everyone goes, this is terrible. The Trump administration is telling all these countries, many, Carl and Africa, no, you can't send people for a very specific reason to protect our sovereignty and our citizens are here. And the truthful and hardworking people who follow the rules to try and come here.
Right.
Yeah,
I think it's a bad practice too. I don't like that part of it where anybody just born here, because especially since it's after 9/11 and we do have enemies, and a lot of people use that to get their sleeper cells over here, or if we're going to take down America, they say it's not going to happen by a foreign army coming invading our borders. It's going to happen internally, and that's what concerns me. So I think for freedom to protect citizenship, I support the Supreme Court's the decision on that.
And they haven't broken all. Okay, Carl and Aaron, there are a number of decisions against what Trump administration wanted. And this idea that Trump's flouting the law, I don't think the facts support that either. He's following the law. But they can disagree and comment on that disagreement. Biden made it very clear he flaunted that he was going to go around the Supreme Court's holding that forgiving student debt was not constitutional. He said, I've worked another way around to do it. So the fact that administrations don't agree with holdings is part of our dynamic tension between the branches. You know, Aaron and K. Carl, some of our listeners have asked, they're curious about our sources. So each show I'd like to just give a shout out, a couple of them. First of all, I really love getting the emails from Professor Jonathan Turley. He's there in the D.C. area. I forget exactly which law school. But interestingly enough, Turley grew up in Chicago as a Democrat to a Democrat family. And he's testified in front of Congress. He's really viewed as a national scholar. And he will often find fault or criticize certain actions of the Trump administration. But the reason I like and am sending around Turley stuff quite often is it's thoroughly researched. He documents and backs up his argument, and he will also lay out what the opposing argument is. So I highly recommend people look him up, subscribe to his newsletter. The other, and I have to look at how to pronounce this name, but a wonderful gentleman, a professor, law school, Volokh, Volokh Conspiracy. And Eugene is a law professor, I want to say, out in California. He puts together a newsletter, comes out every day. It's called the Volokh Conspiracy. And it's got opinions from all across the board. In fact, I've emailed him objecting to one particular law professor's use of, again, inflammatory language against Trump right up front, his assault on our republic, going, dude, you're a law professor and you're doing this. But those are great sources. And guys, to your point, you don't have to become a lawyer to understand this stuff. What you look for is what's the basis of their conclusion? How are they arguing their case? Because, guys, that's how our country works. And I think that's why Trump won last November. It's not just his personality. People want the rules to be followed. They want our process to work.
Yeah, those are great, Chris. Thanks for sharing that with us. And I think what I'll do is I'll put links to those websites if they have them. Just make sure I have them, and I can put them in the show notes. So, real quick, because I wanted to, as we were talking about this, I was doing clicking on the keyboard about birthright citizenship, and I guess to me the 14th. The assumption is that the 14th Amendment guarantees automatic citizenship to everybody that's born here, right? That's the argument. But then when you start looking at words, because all words, as they say, have meaning, jurisdiction, I mean, what they're assuming is that means physical presence and not like full allegiance to the U.S. So
exactly.
when I asked more about this and digging in, it said Senator Jacob Howard, who drafted the clause in 1866, said it excluded persons born in the United States who are foreigners, aliens, who belong to families of ambassadors or foreign ministers. So birthright citizenship for illegal aliens or tourists is likely outside of the original content. And so that, and like you said, K. Carl, that 14th Amendment was really meant to protect all the free slaves after Douglas and Lincoln brought this country back together again, not to enable birthright tourism or incentives for illegal immigrants to come here to become citizens.
I mean, that's why that 14th Amendment, the amendment was created for that reason. You had people being born here before that time, and now all of a sudden, these liberals are getting this think tank. Oh, here's how we can undermine the system.
Right.
And that's what they do.
Hey, Carl, they were here permanently.
Yes.
And they were fully subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. That's in the historical record.
Right. That's right.
And yet, Aaron, you were in the Air Force. Kate Carl, you were flying all over the world. You know what a touch and go landing is.
Right.
Person lands and takes off. I touch the ground. So you literally have services where people will fly in 9 months pregnant. They'll get picked up, get to the hospital, have their kid, get the paperwork, get back on the plane, and fly home.
Right.
They're literally running a racket going, I did it, I touched down. So temporary, superficial jurisdiction is enough for the left. We'll see how that case argues out. Trump, unfortunately, has an uphill battle. But remember, guys, at one point, our country said there are many things that are states' rights. And the founders always believed the more local, the better. And as you know, the tension between federal and state, well, a very controversial decision to overturn Roe v. Wade really didn't overturn women's right to choose. You know what it said? That's the state's decision. There's nowhere in the Constitution that says that. So the Supreme Court tries to keep hewing back to the original structure, because if they don't, and they're allowed to put appendages on and all sorts of, well, but it kind of means this, then you're really taking the Constitution and morphing it into a modern document that's supposed to be flexible for modern stuff. And that's not how our system works. There's a reason behind a rule.
Right, Chris, and you bring up a great point about jurisdiction, and I don't believe that illegal immigrants or their children are subject to the full jurisdiction of the United States because they're here illegally. So yes, they do get partial due process and stuff like that before they get removed from the country. But I think, getting back to the original origin of the 14th Amendment, it does say full jurisdiction of the United States, and they don't have that. And the second point, when you're talking about the courts and, Roe v. Wade and giving it back to the states, there's been a lot of people on social media talking about the Supreme Court case out of Maryland where parents can pull their kids from public schools that are using LGBTQ books. Yeah. And I saw a lot of people like, oh, this is a great win for schools and this and that, and keeping the LGBTQ propaganda out of our schools. But really what people are missing is that it's giving the power back to the parents for the parents to decide what is best for their child's education, and not the state telling the parents, this is what your kid needs.
Yeah, and the howls, K. Carl, from the left. And again, folks, we're not against Democrats. We're not for Republicans. We're for principles. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, one side seems to be becoming untethered, unhinged from any principles. And to that point, guys, look back, K. Carl, historically, I find it fascinating to read that Frederick Douglass pointed out that when the Supreme Court justices way back in some of their first decisions said, well, at the time they wrote the Constitution, the founders owned slaves. And therefore the understanding is they really must not have meant men mean slaves.
Yeah.
Well, Douglass, right? K. Carl pointed out, he goes, no. The common meaning, the common understanding was that when they used the word every man, they included everybody, man, woman, didn't matter race. It was mankind. And of course that view prevailed. So you have one, oh, we don't like originalship. And again, I got to look at Jackson calling it minutia. She didn't like the fact that the majority went back to England. But welcome to the United States. Where do you think our laws have come from? So here's Frederick Douglass pointing out at his time when he was reviewing these things that you can't try and figure out what was in their mind, but you can look to the common understanding of the words. Right, and Aaron, to your point, a national injunction because one judge says, well, this is not legal, and freezes the administration from pursuing a policy they think is based on the actual plain meaning of the birthright citizenship clause, 14th Amendment.
And to your point, Chris, if the founding fathers were truly racist, they would have written a document that says, we the white people.
Yeah.
And nobody, who's going to stop them?
Right.
But they didn't say this, that we the people. And Doug said one time, he said, look, the word slavery is not even in the Constitution.
That's right.
Good point. I'm going to dovetail, Aaron, you mentioned before, whole thing going on in Maryland about parents have the God-given right to guide the educational development of the children, not the government. But here's go back to some historical perspective. There's a direct correlation to what Maryland was trying to do with not giving parents an opt-out, but teaching these children LBGT the world, and to what Douglass dealt with. Because what's the first thing that the slave master did? He made sure he separated the child from the parent or from the mother or father, and made sure that child did not learn the values of that family, of his family. And so the slave master inserted his philosophy in, his belief how he want that child to be reared. It's the same thing's happening now. And think about it. Both of these situations happened in Maryland. Douglass was a slave in Maryland. And this whole thing about taking the rights of parents away is in Maryland. There's nothing new in the sun. Again, the techniques of oppression used by the slave master to make people slaves, make black slaves, are identical to the techniques of oppression by the government now to make all of us slaves. It's nothing new. Wow. We got to make sure we're astute enough to identify when you see it, because if you don't know the truth, you can never recognize a lie. Now, guess what? You're a slave.
What way to close, Aaron? I do have to hop here in a minute, but I do encourage our listeners to check out our Substack. Please share this. And guys, I thought it'd be kind of fun. I want to close by giving a shout out. Each week, I'm going to wear a different hat. This is Connecticut College in New London, Connecticut. My daughter Julia.
I'm investing caps in. You gonna do that?
Yeah, we're gonna have cap competition. But I'm so proud of her because she is looking at international relations and history, and obviously growing up in this house, we'll have our debates, but we talk about history and we talk about the importance of international relations. So a shout out to Connecticut College. Go track team. Go cross country team. Sorry for that plug. Guys, thank you.
Yeah, let's wrap it up because we are over today. We went a little over 38 minutes, I think, somewhere around there. So, okay, Carl, you got any closing thoughts?
No, I'm good, man. Happy 4th of July to everyone.
Yeah.
God bless.
God bless everyone. Happy 4th.
Thanks for joining us on the Liberty Collaborative. If today's episode lit a fire or gave you clarity, share it and be part of the movement. Subscribe, leave a review, and keep the conversation going. Until next time, stand firm, stay free.